Hello and well met. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today we're going to be talking about scaling maps to be optimized and used in Fantasy Grounds. So quite often when we are sourcing maps or creating maps, they tend to get pretty big, meaning that an artist or somebody who's creating the content usually tries to shove everything into one map. Sometimes it's not optimal for Fantasy Grounds. It depends on what you're trying to do with the map. If it's like an overland map and you're not going to add line of sight and tokens and such to it, it should be okay in most cases. If you keep that around 4,000 or by 4,000 or 4K resolution, which is actually 3840 by 2160 pixels. And the recommendations for Fantasy Grounds is to have a map that is under 4K, below 2 megabytes in size, and or 10 megabytes if it's an animated map. So those are the recommendations. You don't have to follow those exactly, but you want to be as close as you can so that the maps aren't going to take too much GPU memory, and they're not going to be hard to pass back and forth between the host and the player. So file size, as far as the physical size, does matter, and also the dimensional size. That's usually what the main culprit is. If you have performance issues, or like your players are looking at the map and they only see a black map or something. Some other things it could be is block data, or you might not have lighting or some sort of light source set up on your maps, but sometimes they'll just be a blank or it doesn't show up at all. So a lot of times it can be related to the formatting and the size, the actual dimensions of the map itself. So what you want to do is when you're creating a map, think of your canvas as 3840 by 2160 and try to cram everything in there if you can, depending on what you're trying to show. If you have like a whole city, maybe you want to break that up into 4 sections or neighborhoods instead of showing the whole city. Or if you have like a large dungeon map, maybe break that up into quarters if you can. I know it's not easy to do that because you're kind of looking for that overall aesthetic. You don't want to make 4 maps, you just want to make one. But either way, it's going to probably take the same amount of time to create 4 separate maps. But if you're looking for consistency and for the stuff to line up, and I get that. That's not an easy decision. The other thing is that you want to first determine the size of your image if it's something that you are importing into Fantasy Grounds from the outside. So as an example, I have a map that I sourced from the DM's Guild, or in this case, the Drive-Thru RPG. This is the Heroic Maps Lair of the Black Dragon. So I thought this was appropriate for this type of show. But the way this is set up is 300 DPI on this particular for this file size. And it says that it's 28 millimeter scale at 100%, for 20 or 1-inch scale at 91%. So these are size for printing, the ones that usually get for different kinds of maps. So this comes out of the PDF, but you get an idea of the scale when it comes to getting maps from a proper source. So that really helps to have that sort of information. So I might take something like this, the actual text here, and use that as my kind of like my guideline. So 300 DPI for printing for VTT is pretty high. Most cases, like even Foundry, they only use like around 200 DPI for the actual sizing for the per grid type thing. But this is really big. This is designed for printing a live actual tile. And so this is the sort of things that you're going to have to realize when you are sourcing maps or when you're building them. So the other thing is, like, when you have an image or a map like that, so these actually come with separate instances for the files. So I think I'll scale this up so you guys can see this a little bit better. Basically, these are the 2 versions. There's one with a grid and then one without. If you're going to be using a grid, you got to be careful when you scale these or change any sizing. So this is a really big file. This is 74 megabytes, almost 75, and the image dimensions is 9,908 by 6,612. That's well over the recommended size. So I probably want about half of that at best. So you do a little math on this, and what you come down to is you analyze what the image is by right-clicking on it or mousing over to get the dimensions. And then you will take that dimension and you will divide it by whatever you think in return in parts of scale. So you got to kind of consider, maybe you want to go down to 4K. So if I want to go to 3840, I need to scale that down. So there's a way to calculate that by doing a little bit of math on it. And generally speaking, that math isn't always perfect because it may not be square. And if you scale the map down too much, and don't do the math that's involved with it, so like the division, that is going to possibly stretch the image so that the squares that are on it, if it already has squares baked into it, they will no longer be square. So if I go up to this image, let me go back in here. So I'm going to put both of these into Fantasy Grounds and show you kind of the difference here. So these are the large unoptimized images. These are made for printing, essentially. So that's something you don't want to add to Fantasy Grounds to use for your games. I'm only adding it here just for the sake of argument and demonstration. So if you go into your assets for your campaign session and go to images and then go to the home area, you can click on folder down here on the bottom under images, and that will pop up the backend folder for your campaign images. And I'm going to hit Control V as in Victor, and that will add those to the to Fantasy Grounds. So now what I'm going to do is take and basically reconfigure this, and I'm going to go ahead and hit Refresh Folder Assets, and you'll get now a folder called Campaign. So this is where those things reside. Now the thing is I'm already starting to see a performance lag. As I clicked on that folder, it had it paused or it hesitated to open that image up. So that's kind of a no good situation. So this is the grid. Now when I try to click on that, it paused because it takes a while for it to take that image and create the thumbnail for it. So it's already, you know, too big. Now I'm going to go to actually create map record. And this could potentially crash your system if you've got low system memory or you have video card issues for your drivers. So here's the map with the grid. It looks pretty nice on here, I have to say, but I'm going to be ended up scaling it down. So I'm going to go to the grid system, and right now it's set to 50 by 50. So let's turn that on and see what we got. So when you do that, look how tiny those things are compared to this image. Another thing I noticed is that it's not quite on, so it's a little bit off on this one, and it has to do with the scaling of the image. So if I want to change that, this here, probably have to go to 300 just to see if that even gets close. And then when you're looking at this for scale, it's off. See, it's not even close. So what I'm going to do is go to the Layers tool, and I'm just going to take and actually, instead of moving the image, because I want to keep it centered, I will take and go back to the grid system and adjust with these arrows here. So I'm going to take this over and just kind of move. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, I can see the performance issue already. It's just really mammoth. So this is close to the actual pixel size, but as you can see, it's off. It's not on at all. And this is the kind of thing you're going to get with maps that have a baked in grid system already painted on it. And also I noticed that it's cut off a little bit on the edge, so that might be by design. So that's the sort of stuff that you're going to fight with if you're not careful with sourcing your image. So I have this set at 300 by 300 DPI. It's not even close. So what you can do in this case, so you can get close to the square size, is you can take and you can right click on a map, go to Layers, and then go to Grid Off, then right click again go to layers, and then single click to set the grid, and just set your cursor where the lines kind of meet up, like the vertices here, and then left click and drag until you get closer to the actual image size. So that's 333. That's pretty big for Fantasy Grounds. So that's a pretty good size image in regards to the scale. And then what you want to do is look at the other parts of this map. See, now I notice that it's off over here. So already the scale of this is kind of messed up. Let's take a look at that. So I'm moving it over to the right a little bit. And when you do so, you want to check all these other ones. See, it's off over here. So this is the kind of thing that you're going to fight with when you have these big maps, or if you try to rescale them. So in this case, I'll probably use just the regular map that doesn't have the grid baked into it, because this is already a hassle. Because now you're trying to line up a grid on an existing grid that's not even close. And then also, I may not have dragged the image properly, so let me go to layers, and I'm going to turn off the grid, and maybe I can drag it a little bit better, because I might have been off a little bit on how I did that. So that's the other thing that can be annoying. So if you go to layers and then go back to set grid, if I set this cursor, that's probably the most important part, is where you set the cursor. And then you left click and drag until you get to the point that you want. So right click, go to layers, go to create grid off, and then now I'm going to just take this thing and grab it and left click and set the grid by going to layers again, set grid, and then try to get it lined up. So left click and drag and get close to, there we go. So that's pretty close. Now when you have this map, it looks like it's lining up a little bit better, because I actually took a little bit more time and was actually a lot more careful. And then you can make a micro adjustment by just kind of nudging that over one, and then I'm going to go down one. And that's almost right dead nuts on there. That's 330 pixels per inch. That's a really big map. So with that in mind, you want to do a little bit of math here. So I probably want to cut that down to half at least, because that's way too big. If you use Roll20 maps from like Roll20, a lot of those are scaled at either 70 or 140. So if you use Fantasy Ground maps, the older ones are generally around 50. I've seen them up to 100. I think 100 is a really good happy medium for quality and maintaining that crispiness, but then also maintaining the optimization for Fantasy Grounds, because that can really throw a wrench through things. So let me expand this over, kind of make this a little bit bigger. So I'm not going to actually work with this image. This is way too big in regards to memory, the pixels per inch, all that stuff. It's just it's not optimized for virtual tabletop, for one. So this must be an earlier map that they did a long time ago. This is Heroic Maps, by the way. And this is basically a Black Dragon's lair in a swamp, which I think is really cool. If I get time, I might end up add the line of sight on here, that sort of thing. But I do like but I notice that where they cut the grid isn't exactly on the right square on this. So you might notice that in some maps are not quite optimized the same way. But it's pretty close. Like, this is what you want to look at when you're scaling these maps. But 330 pixels is really big. So if you're going to scale this down, you probably want to do a little bit of math. And that's probably one of the things that is going to plague you if you don't do the math. Those squares are going to turn into rectangles. And then you'll have to use a tool like MapAlign, which is free on the Fantasy Grounds forums. And I provided a link for that. And that allows you to restretch the map so that the grid lines up easier and a little bit closer. But again, that's a lot of finagling around. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to say from the technical data that came from the PDF that I saw earlier, I'm going to say that each square is scaled at 330 pixels per square inch, which equals 5 feet in game scale. Okay. And then what I want to do is I'm going to ask it to scale down the overall dimensions to fit around 4K without distorting the square grid. And this is 20 by 30. So 20 by 30 squares. So, and I'll say, let me look at that image again. So if I right click on this, and then I go to properties, and then let's see, where is that at? That's not exactly what I wanted. Let's see, properties. Here we go. So yeah, that's 75. Here's the details. So yeah, that's really big. So this is the data that I want. So 9918 by 6612. The original size is for A4 quality, which is print quality. And then, let's see. So DPI is not the same as pixels per inch, but it's for printing. Dots per inch or whatever. So that is that. And then I wanted that 9912, I think it was. 9918 by 6612. Now I'm going to say do the math conversion to scale properly with a 100 pixel per square. So this is a lot of division, fractions, but I'm cheating here. I'm going to have ChatGPT do it, or it would take me forever. So we'll see. So taking that, and it's going to take this and ask me to scale this down, or it's going to give me the formula. So the target is around 2000 by 3000. So your DPI is 300, but it doesn't matter as long as the pixel dimensions are correct. The map will align perfectly with 100 pixels per square in Fantasy Grounds. So resize the map to 2000 by 3000, and then we're going to convert it to WebP so that the actual file size is down. So this is kind of handy to have this, but there's your ratio here for height and width, and it gives you the target number, so right around 2000 by 3000. Now, if that's not quite correct, those squares are going to be off. So we'll find out shortly. So I'm going to go back into Fantasy Grounds, or back into the folder that I was in earlier, and I'm going to pick one of these. So this one has the grid on it, I believe. Yeah. So I want to open this up in a Photoshop-like program. So I'll go with, I have Corel Photoshop, but you can use whatever app that you have available to you if you do have one, or you can use GIMP, which is free. This is an actual paid program. I sometimes use it. I do this for scaling mostly, but I use GIMP for just about everything else. Okay, so here's the map. Yeah, it took it a minute or a few seconds to load it because it's pretty big. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Image and go to Resize. And right now it's 99 by 6612. So for the width, I wanted to go with 2000. And this says 1333. Why is it saying that? Let me take a look. Or was it 3,000? Yeah, it's 3,000. There we go. 3,000 by 2,000 is what I'm trying to achieve. And then I wanted to make sure it's by pixels and that the aspect ratio is locked on it. So that way you get less distortion. Sometimes you have to play with that, but in this case, I'm trying not to. So I'm going to go ahead and sit OK. And it's taken it a few seconds. So it scaled it down quite a bit. And now what I want to do with this is I'm going to go to File, Export, and then, or actually Save As. And then I'm going to change the format to WebP and hit Save. And that should take care of that. So let's take a look at this image. So this is the re-optimized image. So this thing here is less, let's see, no, hold on. There we go. So this thing here is around 2 megabytes now instead of 75. And it's like half the dimensions or almost like a third of what it was before. So this is the new, I'm going to put that information in here in case I have to reference back. So it's 21,000 kilobytes, or like 2 megabytes essentially. Size, I'll say file size, in WebP format. I'll say the file is, and I'm doing this so I keep track of the values, the numbers, the changes, that sort of thing, in case that way, you know, if I have to go back, I got more information. Okay, so yeah, so this is the, so you can adjust the compression settings. So if like that 100 DPI was basically my desired pixels per square, but you can do it, you know, 50, 70. It kind of depends on the overall size of the map. So if you got a giant map, you probably want to go down to 50 squares, sometimes 25. I know that some of the Wizards of the Coast maps that are out there are pretty big, and they don't work well with virtual tabletop. So people have to end up scaling those back, and they end up going to about a quarter of its original size, which is why a lot of them looked blurry back in the day. A lot of them are lower resolution. But you can do some slight reductions in resolution. So if you want to reduce the file size and the overall dimensions a little bit more, you can go with something like this, 1900 by 2850. So you don't want it to be overly complex either. So that we'll get into that later. But this is the best practices based off of the Fantasy Grounds Atlassian Developers Guide and the working with images for the GMs for Fantasy Grounds. So I'm going to have all those links, including the map and where I got this stuff, and the tool, the map align tool, in case you have to stretch the map a little bit. And we might have to, so we'll see what happens. So I'm going to delete these two maps here. I don't want those in the folder anymore. They're way too big. So I'm just going to delete those. And whenever you make changes to Fantasy Grounds, you want to make sure that you hit refresh. But I'm also going to take and fix the title because it's a little bit too big. So what I might do is go something like, let's say I'm going to say map and then underscore HM for heroic maps, and then layer of the black dragon underscore grid. And I don't think I need that, so I'll just put GD. Kind of trying, or GRD. So I'm trying to kind of optimize the file name too. So that way, when it comes up in Fantasy Grounds, I'll know what the heck it is. So I usually put like a leading title here. So any kind of maps that I have, I'll put map underscore. In this case, this is the publisher. And then if you really wanted to, you could, what would be helpful if you put like the dimensions, like this is 3000 by 2000. But if you hover over it, it's basically going to give you the detail if you mouse over it, depending on your OS and such. But basically, so I took this thing down from like 8,000 by something. Now it's down to 3,000 by 2,000. So that's a pretty good compromise, I think, for Fantasy Grounds. And then I'm going to close this because it's no longer in Fantasy Grounds. And then I'm going to go back to Assets. And you see it gave me this error code because the graphic, I deleted that. So it's freaking out about that. See, these are blank now. So what I want to do is hit refresh. And now there's the map that I've resized. And now I'm going to actually create the map record with this. And I notice it didn't hesitate as much. So that's a good sign. If you're opening maps and it's hesitating like that, that could be indicative of too much stuff going on, or whatever the complication might be. So I want to take this now and expand that out, and we'll see what we got here. So now that we have it scaled, let's see if it preserved the squares. That's really the biggest headache in a lot of cases, like the squares, the dimensions here. Does that get preserved if you mess around with the aspect ratio? So I did it mathematically with the help of ChatGPT, but we'll see what happens. So if I go to the grid size, I'm going to change it to 100. And it looks pretty close. I might have to make an adjustment or two. So I just got to nudge it over pretty much. So let's do that. And then take a look at the rest of the map. So that looks like it did it for the most part. Let's take a look at the other parts of the map. So I want to drop down the toolbar here, and I'm going to use this navigation tool. And I'm going to actually expand this thing out to full screen here so we can get a better idea without having to keep moving everything. I'll close this thing. All right, so let's see what we got here. So it's right close. I mean, it's kind of off a little bit. Let me go to, let's change this and knock it over a little bit. So what I want to do is, my instinct is to move the image, but you don't want to move the image. You want to move the grid if you can help it first. So let's see what we got here. So I want to nudge it over. So knocking that over just a hair is going to get closer. And then I want to look at, see what we got over here. Because when it's out of square, you'll notice it right away. You need to go to the opposite side of the map. Yeah, see, it's off over here. So this is the kind of thing that you're going to come across if you use a map that has a grid on it already. And this is the thing that can get very frustrating. So I could live with this. I think this is a decent, happy medium. But again, it's not perfect. Like, even though I did the math for it, I don't know if the image size was being reported exactly to the umpteenth fraction. And the map itself, when they put the grid on there, it could be off slightly. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong here. But I think overall, that looks pretty good. I'm going to change the grid color so it's kind of this yellow, and then turn down the alpha channel. I could live with that if this was not a commercial product and I'm just using it for my own table. I don't mind it being slightly off. That's livable. That's close. That's tolerable. It's when you get into these maps, like when you go to this corner, it's way off, and then you come over here, it's on. That's when when it starts to kind of get annoying. So that's not bad. So doing that mathematically made that closer. So when I mean closer, like these are actually still squares for the most part instead of rectangles. Because if I just said, okay, I want to cut this thing 50% or whatever, it doesn't do it mathematically necessarily. And then when you go to put the grid on it and try to line it up, it's not going to line up. It's going to piss you off. So that's kind of the approach you want to take with these, is to make sure that you find a good source map, or if you're going to make your own, make sure the starting canvas size is 4K or less, and that should keep you on track. So something like this, putting on the grid and such, is kind of a challenge, and that's really what it comes down to, is doing the math, the source of your file, and that sort of thing. So this was close. I want to put a note in here. I'll say the map grid was off by, I don't know what percent. I'll just say was off by, we'll just say 1% error. So yeah, it doesn't perfectly align with tokens Fantasy Grounds, likely due to discrepancies. So here's how to fix it. Yeah, so you can take and, if you know the exact image size, down to the, the umpteenth fractional size, you can probably get a lot closer. But the reporting on the actual file, when I go into here and you right click on it, and then you go to show more options, or if you go to properties, it doesn't necessarily give you the exact, this is what it's giving me. And now it's at 72 DPI, which is about what you want. So if you see maps that are at 72, 74, that's generally a 2K kind of map or 4K map. And then the bit depth is 32, which we don't have to worry about. This DPI is for printing anyways, but you'll see that that's like half the quality or 1/3 of the quality of the image. So you're not getting the 3000.1378, you're not getting that extra information. So you might have to use a different program to get the actual physical size and not the estimated, because that's kind of a rounded type number. And when you do rounding in image sizes, if you're trying to be precise, that really sucks, because there's less accuracy, and you're getting down to 1%. So that's generally what really can bother you when it comes to this. So I want to see, okay, so I have map align. So if you have a really messed up map, you can use something like map align. This thing here, it works, but you kind of have to get used to the behavior of it. So what I would do with something like this is, let's just say that didn't line up quite the way I wanted it to. And I'm going to go ahead and close this from Paint Shop Pro, because I'm going to actually be editing a new version of it. And I go to Assets, and you always want to refresh the folder if you change the names or move files around or whatever. And try not to do that if the files are already linked to story entries or to your books, because it'll break the links possibly. So it doesn't go back. If you change this name here in the file structure, it's not necessarily going to update it throughout. You have to actually relink it. So be careful when you, especially with images, if you mess around with them or change them in any way, shape, or form, you have to refresh Fantasy Grounds. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting with it, and you're going to have these errors popping up and all kinds of stuff. So we're going to go to the folder, and this is the actual image that I had converted, and that's one I was using just a second ago. So for map align, what you can do with this is you will tell it the directory you're in. So I'm going to go to this. I'm going to copy this directory and then paste it up here and hit enter. Oh, I forgot. Here's another thing that's annoying. This map align program does not work with WebP. So I kind of painted myself into a corner there, but this is a free app that you can get on the Fantasy Grounds Forge or on the Fantasy Grounds forums. Look for map align, and basically you load that image in there, and you can adjust the image size by slightly stretching it, left to right. It's like taking a wrinkled blanket and kind of stretching it out so that all the squares line up. I'm not going to do a demonstration of this. It's just going to take too long, but this is the program that you can use if your tiles are way off. So like I was saying earlier, this is actually tolerable to me. This isn't bad. If I go back into the campaign images and go to the uncategorized, so this one here is no longer valid. But oh wait, maybe it was. Oops. I messed that. See, this is what you'll get if you if you mess about with the. So we're going to do create map record. Okay. So again, this is the kind of thing that you kind of have to decide, if it's that much, if it's that important to you, do you need to do all that? Or also when you're making your own, consider the source and your dimensions and such, because that's when the errors start happening sometimes. Like, it may work locally, like I was able to open and close a file and edit it and all that stuff, but when you send that across to your players, some of your players may not have the hardware to support that large of a file. And on top of that, 75 megabytes times how many players, that's 250 or so pixels or megabytes going across your network. That's quite a big file size to transfer back and forth. So that may take time for it to cache and download on your player's machine. And if they've got slow internet or bandwidth issues or whatever, that's going to add to that frustration. All right, so what we did, we decided on, what was it? It was 100 on the scale of the grid, and then we just made a slight adjustment because it wasn't quite on. It was just slightly off, which I think was a pretty good attempt. It wasn't bad. So it looks pretty good overall, like it's just slightly off. And I don't think that's going to kill anything. It's not going to kill immersion or, any of that. Let's see what we got here. And then, yeah, so it's close enough. I mean, good enough for government work here. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, it's off a little bit here. So you can nudge that over just a tad, but if you don't want to do too much, because then it goes off over here. So that's kind of what you're fighting with, because that means these squares are not actually square, they're more rectangular. Yeah, see, now I bumped it over there and now it's off here. So that's what I'm saying. You got to pick your battles here. So I'm not going to adjust it anymore. I think it's close enough. If you really wanted to, you could play with this, like put 100.1 or something like that. But I think you're splitting hairs at that point. It's not really going to help much. So nudge that over just once more. And then if you come look at this close enough, you can see how it's off here. So that map align program will take that and restretch the map so that it kind of fits the squares. So this is kind of the stuff you're going to go through if you use a map that's already built that has a grid in it. Luckily, if you buy a pre-built adventure in Fantasy Grounds, they've already done all this monkeying around for you. But when you go to make your own, just kind of keep this stuff in mind for the size of the map and all that good stuff. See, now it's off over here. So you're going to have to come up with a happy medium and leave it like that, because you're going to drive yourself nuts if you keep messing with this. Yeah, it looks pretty good. It's close enough. It doesn't look that far off. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the edge of this is not exactly square here. And it looks like it's distorted a little bit. And like I said, that's because we didn't have the exact number or the exact file size. We just had the values that the author gave us. In most cases, it's pretty accurate, but this was obviously made for print, not for virtual tabletop. They made a virtual tabletop version just by keeping the original file size and just putting it in a folder. That's not optimized for virtual tabletop. The original size is not. So this is an older map. This is before virtual tabletops were very popular. So that's that. So I might do a little bit of line of sight on here just for the fun of it. So when you have something like this, one of the things you got to be kind of careful of is there's a couple things to consider. So the actual lair is back here in this cavern. And then this stuff out here is outdoors. And then there's like this little loft here, or like a little ledge. I don't know what that's for. Maybe they hide there. I don't know. So this is actually a nest because there's some eggs in here. So what I'm going to do with the grid is actually kind of turn it down a little bit. That way it's not too obnoxious. And then I want to take and start putting the line of sight and it's going to draw the lines in. One of the things that you want to try to avoid is having these like really fine, minute points along a cavern, because it's really going to add up in regards to performance issues and for the data that's used to calculate and keep the line of sight accurate when you have tokens on the map. So what I want to do is first, we always set the scale, which we've kind of done that already. We did the size adjustment, messed around with the squares and the grid. So let's say we're all done with that. So now we're going to do is start adding line of sight. So I'm going to go to the line of sight tool, and I'm just going to go to the line tool up here, and I'm in the wall tool. And all I want to do here is click around some of this area, and you don't have to have every little square inch covered. As a matter of fact, I'm going to come up here on this upper ridge because I don't necessarily want to be down here on the ground. I want to be up here in this upper portion. So what I'll do is do these longer lines first, the outskirts here. So I'm just going to take and start my point here on the left corner here. And if you want to make a straight line, you hold the shift key. And then I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. Now what I'm going to do is let go of the shift key and just kind of loosely come up and add these lines in here. That's all you have to do. You don't have to have a line for every nook and cranny, and it's going to actually come out okay. And when your players are on the map, they're going to be able to see the details of the map itself, the contour and all the nice fancy textures and such. If you go right up to the edge, they're gonna lose that, and it's just gonna look like a blob, like a black line, and that's not really the experience you want necessarily. So something like this, this is kind of an exception here. I kind of do have to go kind of small because of the width of this, but you know, you don't need a gazillion lines here. You can just kind of click through here. You don't have to be right accurate up to the very edge. That's not going to work well. Caverns are the worst when it comes to optimization for these lines and these points. These tend to give you the most grief when it comes to performance with line of sight, because there are so many points on here to calculate that it can be really hard on your system and on your players, because it has to render and calculate off of each one of those points to maintain the line of sight and, you know, the shadows. So that's why it does that. And it depends on your system too, and also your player systems. You have to kind of optimize for them, not so much for yourself, which is kind of sucks, but that's, if you're going to host games, you really have to consider optimizing for everyone. And that's your lowest denominator, right? Whoever's got the weakest system, you kind of want to optimize for that. And you won't know that until you really start playing, but that's just the reality of this. This is true of any role-playing RPG virtual tabletop. You're going to run into these limitations regardless. I read on the forums for Foundry, and I'm seeing the exact same kind of complaints. Oh, these extensions are broken, or the mods are broken, or how many tokens can I have on the map before it starts giving me problems? And, you know, there's just the same problems, just in a different, maybe in a different section, but it really is universal. There is basic computing limitations for these sorts of things. And I don't know if people go, when they do make maps or when they find maps, I don't think they realize that initially. And then you start wondering, well, I think Fantasy Grounds sucks, or it's broken because it can't handle this 8K map. You know, and that's generally what will end up happening in a lot of cases. Or the other side of that is that you might have technical issues with your network. So there could be a blockage going on, like one of your players can't see anything in your game. And a lot of that is caused by when they first install Fantasy Grounds, they may not have got the pop-up that needs to be allowed through. And so when they go to connect to your game, they can't receive any data because their computer is essentially blocking the data so it doesn't harm your computer. It's trying to protect your computer. All right, so if you need to make any adjustments, you can go back to the selection tool. I'm going to move that down because it didn't need to be there, and just kind of back it off a little bit. And the reason I'm doing this is just so that I'm not going to cover up a lot of the nice edge artwork there. And this stuff here is kind of like sloped anyway, so you wouldn't necessarily want a line of sight on that. You don't want it blocked. If you do find a map when you're right up to the edge, there's a peek through that gives you in pixels, you can put like 0.1 or whatever, and it will kind of back it off a little for you. And that'll make it so you can see what's going on. That's not too bad. So the other thing to consider is this map here is both indoor and outdoor. So that could be problematic in regards to lighting, or this might be open to the air. I mean, it just depends. But this, I believe this is a cavern, but it depends on your perception of the map itself. Like, how is it drawn? You know, what does this stuff represent? So there's some trees here. If you wanted to put line of sight on there, I've just put it on the trunks or maybe just a little bit in the center. So instead of using the wall tool, I'll just use a few terrain-like features. So I might take this, go to the line tool, terrain, and maybe just do a couple of these trees down here, just so you have that perception that there's some pretty good sized trees. Maybe something like that. You don't need to do the whole tree itself, just maybe the trunks. And that way you get the illusion that there's some pretty good sized trees. So that's just some stuff that you'll learn as you start using the platform. Like, is it necessary to have all of these, every single tree have that sort of, you know, that illusion of having a big tree trunk that blocks your vision? So I think that's just a, you know, just a taste thing. Like, you know, whatever you think is necessary to tell your story is really what I'm getting at. So I'll take something like this. I kind of messed up, but I'll just take this and stretch it out and just kind of make, because it's just a tree trunk. Maybe you do something over here. There we go. So the other thing is that you might, if you want this to be interpreted as being indoors or outdoors, you can do that by, you can add a door here. But I think this was meant to be like a ravine, because if you see this here, you got all these ferns and stuff. So I don't think it was meant to have a ceiling or a roof. If it did, it's caved in or something like that. So I believe that the interpretation of this was not necessarily a cave, but it's like a dugout or like a little, kind of like an area, and it's supposed to be kind of swamp thing. So that's the other thing. So there we go. So you can see all these data points here. That's quite a few for this cavern, and you don't probably want too many more than that. That's once you start getting up there and these data points, it really starts to lag the system. And like I said, caverns are probably the worst, because those have the most data points, and they cause probably the most grief. For far, like if you ever played Dungeons of the Mad Mage, those maps are so huge. They're just ridiculous for a virtual tabletop, that is. I love the maps, don't get me wrong. I love the classic maps, but in a virtual tabletop, it doesn't compete very well. All right, so unless you go out and make all the individual maps, like rooms and such for it, that's another story. But anyway, so you might do that, and if you want your players to be able to climb up on these features, you can add these. So I might take and add terrain on this one, or I can do line of sight if you don't want them to climb up on it. So I can do this one, just kind of go like this, like a stalagmite kind of thing. Maybe there's really nowhere for them to harbor themselves up there. So you can do something like that if you want that to be an actual wall or something. And this thing, I make it just a touch bigger. All right, so that's, basically the gist of it. Now let's take a look at that, what it looks like. That's what the players see when they don't have a light source, by the way. So if I go to the party sheet, or excuse me, the combat tracker, and start adding these guys onto the map, let's see what we get. This is a way to test it too. So I'm going to take this line of sight off temporarily, and I'm going to drag and drop the party into this area. So I'm going to use this faction area. Let me bring back my pointer. I don't know what happened to it. Huh, interesting. Anyway, so I'm going to take and put these guys and girls on the map here. So take this, drag and drop it, and there's our formation that we set up in our party sheet. So if you haven't played in a while, you can go to the order tab and you can set up your formation ahead of time. So when you do drag them, they drag into a certain formation. All right, so I'm going to turn back on the line of sight and click on this individual. So this fighter folk here doesn't have dark vision, so they're just going to see this grayed out area. The dwarven soldier has infravision or dark vision, so you can see in the dark. If I move him around, yeah, he can see at night. Same thing with this elf. So they're looking around. This individual probably needs a torch, and this individual. So what I'll do is, if you have a character and they don't have a light source, they're going to need a torch, or there needs to be a torch or some kind of lighting inside. The other thing I can do here is, maybe it is still dark nighttime. I can go into the lighting and I can actually turn on the, we'll say moonlight, and that kind of adds a little bit more light, but it's still rather dark. So it's moon, the moon's out, so it has a little bit of glow where they can see. And then I'll take and go to the character sheet and see if they have any light sources. In this case, this particular character doesn't have anything set up for a light source. I'll have to take a look, see what's going on. So go to inventory. Now they do have torches in their inventory. So as a preliminary thing, if you don't have it set up on their actions tab, you can always go over to the main effects button up here in the top right, and you can drag and drop, or the player, which is better, the player does it. But if you take and grab the torch, let's say that this folk hero here, she puts a torch on herself, and this guy doesn't really need one if she already has it set up. So this is where her lighting source comes in. So yeah, she can see better that way. There we go. All right, so that's basically the way to check these. And then if you want them to look fancy, like if you wanted more like, let's do a daytime type thing. So let's change that, the lighting source, and let's go to sunlight. And then we can actually remove this effect from the player. If the player puts it on, they can also remove it themselves. So now we have where the players are actually, they have enough light to see. And you can see this line of sight. When you have these big, huge blobs for trees and such, it doesn't look too good. But I think if you just have like a minimal amount of line of sight on here for the trees, it's not as obnoxious, or it doesn't look as weird. Let's see what we got here. So the elf is coming over here. Here's this cavern. It's like, hey, we can camp here. I think this might be like 5 or 10 feet up or down, depending on how you look at it. So maybe we'll put a little camp there. They probably don't realize that they're camped right next to the Black Dragon. However, a good DM would probably give them hints. They'd probably say there's bones and it stinks, or there's some kind of weird smell coming from there. And they might even hear them before they get there. All right, so I'm going to temporarily turn off this lighting, and I'm going to put these guys up here kind of out of the way, because I'm going to do a little bit of customization. And this is something I encourage you to do if you have assets for it. So for instance, like these trees are static. They don't, it smells like elderberries. Yeah, right. More like a buttberry. It smells like dangleberries. Okay, so this is where a tree would be. And what I want to do is take and add some kind of asset to it. So if I go to assets and go back to the home area, I'm going to put animated tree or something like that for the search term, because I want to use some of the animated assets. Okay, maybe put I didn't have it selected right. You got to make sure you're in images. So animated tree. Try that. Nope. Okay, so I'll do animation tree. Nope. Okay. And I spelled it wrong, so that doesn't help. Animation. So yeah, make sure you spell the animation. Okay. Nope. So I'll just go back to animated. Just do that for my search term. Yeah, oh, here we go. Animated was a good search term. Okay, so there's air particles here, which I think would look good inside the cavern, maybe. It would be kind of more of an effect, not necessarily anything important. And what I normally do is I will stage this stuff up. So like here's some birds, some butterflies. So maybe I would put that outside. So I'll take that and drag that down to the hot links down here. And then here's an animated bush. Here's some birds, some bats. There's fire. What else we got here? There's some, animated rose bush. Grab that. Here's some flowers that are slightly animated. There's some falling leaves. What else we got here? Okay, so here's the leaves overlay. So this is what I was looking for. Okay, so what I do with these technically is I will, I'll go ahead and add these in to kind of give this a little bit more life. Dragons of elderberries, so they are elder. Okay, so what I'm going to take is put, like here's the leaves overlay, so I want to go to the layers tool and take this information and drop it on here. And what you can do is you can actually rotate this out before you place it. And this is a 4x3, so I'm just going to go with like probably a 3x2 or something like that. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, there we go. So what I'll do with that is take that, and once it's on there, I'll just kind of, whoops, I gotta select it. So make sure I select the asset first, and then go to tint, and then take that and kind of turn this down. And what that'll do is give you the illusion that this tree is moving. And then once you have that asset there, you can make a duplicate layer and move it, and then I'll rotate it out so it's facing the right way, or the upward direction. So that's just a way to, to make this look a little cooler. So take this information here and kind of shrink it a little. If you have to stretch it, you can. And do the same thing for this one, just slightly size it so it kind of fits more. And you can hold the shift key, or excuse me, the control key, so it's not, doesn't, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So that's the thing, is I'm going to lock this, once I have the line of sight on there, I'm going to lock the map layer so I don't actually move it like I just did. And then take this and I'm going to put this, scale it back. And now hold down the Alt key and adjust this where you want it to go. So you can do stuff like that to kind of bring the map to life. Maybe I'd do that in a couple other areas. And then there's some butterflies here. So what I'll do there is I'll probably start the players up over here somewhere. So I might take and put them like down here in one of these patches, kind of make everything look peaceful. Give them the fake false impression. So here's the animated butterflies. And maybe I'll put some here. That looks a little big. Take that, turn this down to like 4. There we go. So you can take something like that and kind of place it, maybe another one over here somewhere, like down in here. So I'll make a duplicate and then drag the layer over here. Right there. And that way you have a couple spots where you have that. And then, like I said, if you wanted to make like a little campfire, you could take some of that fire animation and place it up in here. And then maybe they think that's a safe place to camp, but they don't realize that black dragons live on the other side of this rock formation. Yeah, and there's bones up there, so that should be an indicator that something's going on here. So if I started them up here, they probably saw that and they're like, crap, there's something going on here. Yeah, that's crazy. Let's take a look at do we have a black dragon available? Yeah, adult black dragon. Let's take a look at that. So bring this over, drag and drop this onto the record here. And then I'm going to drag and drop this token onto the map. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, it's pretty good sized. So go into play mode. Let's turn on the line of sight now. So there's the old black dragon. Yeah, that's a pretty good size token. Now let's change it to the camera mode. Oh yeah, that's pretty huge. Yeah, that's large. It probably almost can see over the top of the ridge there. Yeah, it's almost too big for the for the nest. There's its treasure hoard, so maybe it's guarding that. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's pretty good size beast there, I'd have to say. Yeah, that's pretty mammoth. And that's another reason for backing off on the line of sight. Because now you can see on the edge here, you can see more of the cavern, and you have more room to move around. Because when you start getting these tight areas, it gets really tight, like under 5 feet. Your players get stuck in the walls, and that's really annoying. So that's basically the types of things you do with these maps. Is make sure they're the right size, optimize them for Fantasy Grounds if necessary, if they're not already done so. And like I said, most of the pre-published adventures have already got the stuff worked out, so you don't have to mess with that. But if you want to start bringing in custom maps and making your own, take heed of the guidelines on the Fantasy Grounds Atlassian. And also, when you get something from a publisher or you're making your own maps, make sure you get them around 4K or less. You don't need a 8,000 by whatever image for Fantasy Grounds or Foundry or any of the other ones, because it's overkill and it will definitely cause problems for at least one of your players. So yep, that's kind of the deal here. Swamp Dragon. So what I was looking at before I decided to do the show was I was taking a look at some of the assets that I had, and I said, I want to go kind of revisit this. I go through this at least once a month because I know there's new people joining the community, and then also some of us need reminders, because if we don't mess with that stuff too much, you kind of forget it, and you don't, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. So I was taking like some of the content that I had and taking and putting it in Fantasy Grounds, and I said, why don't I just show people how to do it, at least while I'm working. I can kind of share that process with them. And this is just kind of some of the work that I was doing earlier. Yeah, see, like this guy here, I was going to make this a ranger, but I was trying to find a full body image for him, so that's another annoying thing. So anyways, this was the black dragon layer. And then I used the map align tool, or at least showed the map align tool if you have to stretch the map. And then I was taking and I got some stuff on the DM's Guild. So this one is a PDF for swamp encounters. So I thought, hey, what a cool thing. So there's tables, there's tools on here to kind of give you some content. So if you wanted to set that map up and use that as your encounters, you could. This looks more like for a region, not just a battle map, but it gives you some ideas. Even if you don't use it, you kind of get some ideas on these swamp encounters. And I like the mundane items, the minor treasures. So you can actually take this information and you can copy this stuff and use it in Fantasy Grounds. If you use the table import tool, you can do that. So you take this stuff and copy and paste it, and you have to mess with the formatting though. That's the only thing, is that without the formatting, it's hard to import it unless you want to hand enter everything, one at a time. You could do it that way too. But that was just some content, and I found some other maps like this one. Let's see, this one was set up for, this one is more virtual tabletop friendly, and I could see what assets they used. I can't remember what the artist is, but people will use the other assets from other artists. So here's another Black Dragon lair, which I thought was interesting. It's numbered, and I think this was set up to be used with this one shot here. So if you wanted a one shot adventure, you can get these off the DMs Guild, and it talks about where you could place this. There's some adventure hooks, some tables, random encounters, just little things to kind of help you set up your encounters in Fantasy Grounds. This wouldn't take too long to put in. It's only 9 pages, so it's probably about 8 pages worth of stuff because half of it's artwork. So it's probably like 6 pages. And you only have like some story entries, a couple images. You have some tables and some text. That wouldn't take too long to put something like this in there and use this as a way to do a one shot. Anyways, take care, you guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you around next time. Bye bye.